So Oath of Fire is a very particular book. It's a sapphic retelling of Eros and Psyche, but it's also a contemporary update of that. In Oath of Fire, it's not just that these gods exist, but also that they have this complicated system that's not unlike the courts that you would see in a lot of fae fiction, which is always something that's fascinated me. And so when I was updating this, I was thinking of Psyche, as I mentioned, being this idol figure who kind of doesn't really do anything wrong until she takes the mask off of Eros. And I kept thinking of this, what sort of person would be an idol today to a lot of people? And I thought of streamers and internet media personality. And so that's the direction that I went with for Psyche, is that she starts out being this like she's a therapist, but she gets kicked out of that job, things go left for her, and she tries out being this internet personality and works out very well for her. But it catches the attention of these background figures, this court of gods who don't really like the attention that she's getting, who covet it, and who try to sacrifice her. And just like in the myth, she's saved by arrows. But I thought it would be cool to play with this unseen world, because that's always a trope I've loved in contemporary urban fiction, which I read a lot of growing up as well. In the world of Oath of Fire and in its sequel, which I'm working on now, there are these things called courts, and these courts exist in a different layer than the real world does, and they're inhabited by these things called people call them a lot of things, but we can think of them as gods. And each one of these gods is a domain, has a domain that belongs to one of the bigger courts. So, for instance, Eros is her domain is love, passion specifically. Passion is how she's referred to when she's within these halls. And she belongs to the court of fire, which is ruled by her mother Aphrodite, who has the domain of love. So these courts occasionally throw little shindigs to invite humans into, because some of them like eating humans, some of them just like toying with humans, some of them just like doing other stuff with humans. So there's these yearly invites that are very, very hard to get, and that's what Psyche ends up getting, is an invite to this other realm. It was honestly, I was doing so many complicated things with the world building in terms of these domains, these courts, my thoughts about various Greek myths. Where we are in the timeline of Greek myths is also really important, because there's, as you well know, a whole history of things that happens, that things lead to other things, lead to other things. It's very generational. And so I put so much work into figuring out where we were there and what these gods should be, which ones I should use, which stories I should reference, that because I've lived in Brooklyn for most of my life, I was like, well, I'll just set it in Brooklyn. I've been to a lot of exclusive parties that are not exactly what happens in Oath of Fire, but it wouldn't surprise you to have heard of these things. So I picked locations that I had been to, ones that I had known well, and ones that I thought were always a little magical to me in some way. A big plot event happens at the Botanic Gardens in Brooklyn, for instance, and that was somewhere I went all the time when I was younger. And it's right next to the library, right next to the zoo. It's a very cool place to be. So it was honestly being able to introduce these places to people who have not seen them, and to put them on the page for people who have been there, was really fun. I haven't gotten to write Brooklyn before, and it was just, Brooklyn has a huge chunk of my heart, so it was lovely. The sequel is centers around a character that we meet in Oath of Fire, who, for most of the time, we refer to her as Bondi, because that's her screen name. That's how Psyche knows her. But her real name is Iphigenia, and there's a very, very famous myth with Iphigenia, kind of one of the major ones for Artemis too, that deals with the very start of the Trojan War. Agamemnon, who we all know from this story, is one At least I hope everybody knows who Agamemnon is. He is told that in order for the Greeks to win the Trojan War, he needs to sacrifice something that's dear to him, and so he sacrifices his eldest daughter, Iphigenia. And Iphigenia is saved at the very last moment in some tellings of the story by Artemis and becomes one of her handmaidens. And so this novel is about that story. It's a retelling of that story. Obviously, it's very different to fit in with the cosmos that we've built up here, but that's the core of the story. I mean, Artemis plays a big role. She shows up for a little bit in Oath of Fire, but she's not huge in it. We do spend a lot more time with Iphigenia, though, and I think that she's a very interesting person. In the same way that I wanted to explore the kindness behind Psyche, I wanted to explore what would make somebody willingly choose to give their life in a situation like Iphigenia is faced with. And a lot of the tellings of that story, she's informed of what's going on, and she says, well, that's fine. I guess I can die for Greece, even though her mom is like, what is going on? You are killing our daughter for maybe winning a war? That doesn't make any sense to me. Don't you love her? Why would you kill her? Um, but Iphigenia talks a lot about her duty to her family and also her duty to Greece as a whole. And something about that always struck me just with a tiny bit of hollowness. And I wanted to examine what drives a person to the point where, despite having this very fulfilling life where they're doted on by their parents and everything like that, they say, well, you know what, I'm fine with dying here. So she's a bit maudlin as a character, but the book is a lot about her working through that.